The story opens with a young girl named Emily Cale jolting awake after a news alert flashes across her phone. The report is about President James Sawyer preparing for important peace treaty talks in the Middle East. Emily, already obsessed with politics, rushes to her window with excitement as helicopters thunder past outside. Inside one of those helicopters is President Sawyer himself, traveling back toward the White House with Special Agent Carol Finnerty beside him. During the flight, Sawyer casually asks the pilot to do the thing, meaning he wants the usual route change so they can pass over the reflecting pool near the Lincoln Memorial. It is clearly something he enjoys doing whenever he gets the chance. As they fly over the historic landmark, Sawyer once again mentions how Lincoln supported women's voting rights, a little fact he apparently repeats every single time they take this route. Meanwhile, John Cale, a Capitol police officer, is watching Sawyer speak on the news. The president is talking about poverty and how it remains one of the biggest problems facing the country. After listening for a moment, Cale returns to his own duties. His job is to provide security for Speaker of the House Eli Rafelson, so he picks Rafelson up from his home and drives him toward the White House. At the same time, Martin Walker, the head of the Presidential Secret Service detail, is also watching the president's speech, but his morning carries a much heavier feeling. He prepares a gun and carefully places an American flag pin beside a photograph of his son Kevin, who died during a failed Black Ops mission in Iran. Walker says goodbye to his wife, Muriel, then leaves for what is supposed to be his final day at work. While walking with Rafelson, John runs into a young woman named Jenna. He asks her if she can help arrange an interview with Finnerty for a position in the Secret Service. Jenna agrees to help. Cale also asks if she can get White House tour passes for his daughter Emily, since Emily is deeply into politics and practically idolizes President Sawyer. Jenna tells him that should not be difficult. Elsewhere in the White House, a red-haired man named Conrad Cern quietly enters room 116 without drawing attention. He is dressed as if he belongs there, pretending to be one of the workers, and no one realizes anything is wrong. Later, John goes to pick Emily up from her mother's house. Emily is clearly upset with him and refuses to speak properly. Her mother, Melanie, reminds him that he missed Emily's talent show the week before because of his demanding job. It is obvious that John has disappointed his daughter many times before, and Emily's cold attitude comes from that pain. But the moment he hands her the White House passes, her mood changes completely. Suddenly, all the anger disappears, and she becomes thrilled beyond words. Back at the White House, Sawyer notices a reporter named Roger Skinner outside, loudly criticizing his policies. Finnerty then tells him that his wife, Allison, is on the phone. Allison speaks to him with warmth and confidence, reminding him that she believes in him. She also tells him to keep the pocket watch she gave him close. Sawyer assures her that it is in his front pocket, right next to his heart. Meanwhile, Conrad, still disguised as a janitor, climbs into a truck carrying a box. What no one realizes is that the box is hiding a powerful bomb. John and Emily finally arrive at the White House. They pass through security and meet Finnerty. John and Finnerty recognize each other from college, giving their meeting an awkward but familiar energy. Soon after, Cale sits down for his interview with Finnerty and Special Agent Ryan Todd. During the interview, his background is discussed. Cale served in Afghanistan and even saved Rafelson's nephew, proving he is far from inexperienced. But his record also works against him. His credit score is poor, his college grades were average, and his history shows that he has trouble listening to authority. Because of that, Finnerty sees him as too risky and unqualified for the Secret Service. John tries to convince her that his real-world experience matters more than numbers on a file, but Finnerty refuses to change her mind. In the end, she turns him down. Afterward, Emily eagerly asks her father whether he got the job. Not wanting to crush her excitement or lose the chance to look like the hero she wants him to be, John lies and tells her what she wants to hear. He lets her believe that he will be serving the president. Somewhere else inside the White House, Walker joins a meeting with the rest of the president's protective team. Since this is his last day, the agents surprise him with a cake decorated with sparklers. Walker looks genuinely touched and grateful for the gesture. John and Emily then join the official White House tour. As they move through the building, John notices a group of men who look slightly suspicious, though they are dressed as home theater repairmen and appear to be there for work. He does not stop to investigate and keeps moving with the tour. Their guide, Donnie Donaldson, leads the group through the building. Donnie quickly becomes impressed by Emily's knowledge of White House history and security trivia. She even mentions the location of the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, explaining that she researched it online. Her level of detail surprises him. the tour is suddenly interrupted when President Sawyer himself appears and greets the visitors. Emily is completely starstruck. She becomes excited like a true fan and asks him a question for her YouTube channel. Then she proudly introduces her father, saying how happy she is that he will be working as part of the president's security. Sawyer immediately understands that John has lied to his daughter about getting the job, but he keeps the moment from becoming uncomfortable. After Sawyer leaves, Emily goes to the bathroom. While she is gone, John and Donnie talk about the war in the 1800s when the White House was burned. At the same time, Conrad enters the Capitol building carrying a mop and bucket. He leaves it in the middle of the room, as if it is nothing more than cleaning equipment. Then, just as the timer on his watch reaches 0, the hidden bomb detonates inside the building. As Finnerty drives away from the area, she suddenly sees a massive explosion tear through the Capitol building. The blast sends chaos across Washington, and everyone on site instantly begins moving into emergency mode. Staff and personnel are quickly evacuated, but the White House tour group is ordered to stay exactly where they are, leaving the visitors trapped and confused while the situation outside spirals out of control. That is when the men John noticed earlier, the so-called repair workers, reveal who they really are. They are not technicians at all. They are heavily armed mercenaries who have been hiding in plain sight. Without wasting a second, they attach silencers to their weapons and begin storming through the White House, taking down every agent they come across. The group is led by Emil Stentz, a ruthless operator who knows exactly where he wants to go first. His target is the armory. Once inside, the attackers grab heavier weapons and gear, loading themselves up for the next phase of the assault. As they move toward an elevator, Emily manages to hide before they can see her. While the White House burns and panic spreads, Walker takes command on the outside, ordering a perimeter to be formed and telling staff to evacuate. Then the real assault begins. Stentz's hit squad moves with terrifying precision, and their plan is clearly well organized. They take control of the rooftop and begin eliminating the guards positioned around the perimeter. Their aim is brutal and accurate, and in only moments, the White House security response starts falling apart. Inside, John Cale is losing his mind. He knows Emily is somewhere in the building, but he is stuck with the tour group and cannot simply run off without drawing attention. Every second that passes makes him more desperate. Meanwhile, Emily is forced to watch the White House security forces being wiped out right in front of her. Somehow, she manages to avoid being captured at first. She keeps herself hidden while 2 of the mercenaries open the gates, allowing several vans to drive straight onto the grounds. Emily records the entire thing on her camera, capturing proof of the attack as it unfolds. From this point on, the situation becomes far more dangerous. The mercenaries strip off their disguises, and we are introduced to more of the attackers, including Tyler and Killick. Killick quickly proves himself to be one of the most dangerous men in the group, cutting through agents and helping take control of the building. Soon, the tour guests are rounded up and held hostage. John manages to grab a gun and tries to break away. The mercenaries spot him and open fire, but he moves fast, dodging their shots and slipping out of their reach. Outside, helicopters approach the White House, attempting to respond to the attack, but the mercenaries fire heavy artillery at them, forcing the choppers to pull back before they can get close. Walker tells the president that they have only one option now. They need to reach the secure bunker immediately, because if they stay exposed, they will be killed. Back inside, John reaches the bathroom and realizes Emily is not there. Before he can process it, a mercenary attacks him. John tricks the man, fights back and kills him, then takes his radio so he can listen in on the attacker's communications. A moment later, he sees the president's security detail moving through the hallway. Sawyer is being escorted toward the safe room, while the vice president is taken aboard Air Force One, which immediately takes off into the sky for protection. At first, Walker appears to be doing his duty. He leads Sawyer and the presidential detail toward the PEOC, the Underground Emergency Operations Center. But then, without warning, Walker turns on them. In a shocking betrayal, he kills the security agents protecting Sawyer, revealing that he is not an ally at all. John overhears Walker speaking with Stentz through the attacker's video feed and manages to track their location. When he sees Sawyer in danger, he opens fire, giving the president a chance to run. During the escape, Sawyer hits Stentz, and John takes down one of the mercenaries named Bobby. With no time to think, John and Sawyer sprint through the corridors as the attackers chase after them. Eventually, they find themselves trapped with nowhere else to go, so the 2 of them jump into an elevator. The mercenaries try to intercept them on the lower level, but John and Sawyer slip away just before they can be caught. Moments later, Stentz and Walker enter the same elevator, completely unaware that the president and John are hiding right above them. Inside, Stentz angrily confronts Walker, clearly frustrated by how the situation is going. After that tense exchange, the two head off to find Tyler, the hacker, and order him to begin his part of the mission. They also force the remaining White House staff and secretaries into the Blue Room with the other hostages. Outside, Finnerty brings Speaker Raffleson to a command center, where they meet General Caulfield. From there, they contact Vice President Hammond aboard Air Force One and brief him on the disaster unfolding at the White House. Meanwhile, still above the elevator, John tells Sawyer that they should call in SEAL Team 6 and put an end to this. Sawyer explains that there is a satellite phone inside the presidential residence, but reaching it means they will have to climb several floors higher through the building. News crews and military forces begin setting up outside the White House, turning the attack into a national crisis playing out in real time. Inside the PEOC, Tyler enters like he owns the place, shoving a lollipop into his mouth before plugging his equipment into the United States government systems. With that, the hacking operation officially begins. The hostages are moved into another room, where they are soon joined by the remaining secretaries and staff members. Emily, still trying to stay brave, continues recording footage of the mercenaries and uploads it to her channel. At the same time, her mother sends her a text message, and the notification sound gives away her hiding place. Killick hears it and moves toward the closet where Emily is hiding. He threatens to shoot if she does not come out. Emily waits just long enough for the upload to finish, making sure the footage gets out to the world. Only then does she surrender. Killick grabs her and brings her to the rest of the hostages. Back near the elevator, John spots one of the mercenaries moving through the building with javelin missiles. He and Sawyer are almost discovered, but another attacker dismisses the concern and tells his partner to stop being paranoid. That small mistake keeps John and the president hidden for the moment. The scene then shifts to Air Force One, where Vice President Hammond is speaking with General Caulfield and Finnerty. Finnerty explains that the Constitution creates serious limits on how the military can respond, meaning U.S. troops cannot simply storm into the White House and begin fighting without proper authority. Then comes the call that changes everything. Walker contacts them, and everyone is stunned to learn that he is the man behind the entire attack. He demands a ransom of $400 million from the Federal Reserve. When they ask about the president's safety, Walker lies, claiming Sawyer is in his custody. He threatens to execute the president on the South Lawn unless he gets his plane and the money within 2 hours. While the government tries to process the impossible betrayal, John and Sawyer continue, moving toward the president's private residence. They finally reach the satellite phone and manage to contact the people coordinating the crisis from outside. John quickly explains what is happening inside the White House and gives them a rundown of the attackers, the hostages, and the president's condition. Finnerty then tells John and Sawyer that their best chance is to reach the hidden tunnels beneath the White House. Right as John and Sawyer are trying to move, Cale notices a couple of mercenaries nearby and quickly pulls the president into hiding. His ammo is running low, so he knows he cannot afford to waste a single shot. He manages to take down the first attacker, but the second one rushes him, forcing John into a brutal close-range fight. The struggle spills into the kitchen, where the two men smash through everything in their path. The fight only ends when President Sawyer grabs an automatic weapon and is forced to step in himself, getting his own hands dirty to save John. After surviving yet another close call, Cale contacts Finnerty again and tells her that he has just saved the president's life one more time. Finnerty tells him to turn on the news, and when John does, his heart nearly stops. Emily's footage, the same video she secretly uploaded from inside the White House, has gone viral and is now being broadcast on national television. The world can finally see the attackers clearly, but for John, this is terrifying. He realizes his daughter has exposed herself to the terrorists. While John panics, Melanie sees the news too and immediately rushes toward the White House, desperate to get to Emily. Unfortunately, Stentz and his men also see the video. Without hesitation, Stentz heads straight for the hostages. He finds Emily, snatches the phone from her hand, and slaps her across the face. Then he coldly warns her that she will not make it through the day. Because of Emily's video, the Pentagon is able to start identifying the men behind the attack. Killick is described as a born sociopath. Tyler is revealed to be one of the best hackers in the world, a former NSA employee who was fired. General Caulfield then explains who Stentz really is. He was once connected to a paramilitary group, but when the Sawyer administration came into power, his operation was shut down. That decision eventually led to Stentz spending 2 years locked up in a foreign prison, giving him every reason to hate Sawyer. Meanwhile, Cale and Sawyer finally reach the underground tunnels beneath the White House. For a brief moment, it seems like they might have found a way out, but Stentz's team has hidden cameras throughout the area, and they quickly discover the president's location. Even worse, the tunnel gate has been wired with explosives. Within seconds, John and Sawyer are under heavy fire and are forced to retreat. They barely escape the ambush and make their way to the presidential limousine. Stentz fires at them at first, but then decides to chase them down in another vehicle instead. As John tries to drive toward the west gate, Sawyer warns him that the gate is built from extremely strong metal and the limo will never break through it. With no clean exit available, John swerves away and starts circling across the lawn and around the fountain, trying to outmaneuver the mercenaries chasing them. The attackers keep hammering the limo with gunfire, but John uses sharp driving moves to take out one of their vehicles. Then a U.S. tank arrives on the scene, seemingly giving them a chance, but before it can make a difference, it is destroyed by an RPG. The same weapon is then aimed at the presidential limo. Sawyer searches inside the vehicle and finds an RPG of his own. In a wild and unbelievable move, he climbs partly out of the car window and fires the rocket launcher toward the gate, blowing it wide open. The entire moment is caught by news cameras, and the reporters watching can barely believe what they are seeing. But just as John is about to focus on escaping, Killick drags Emily to a window and threatens to kill her. Seeing his daughter in danger completely shakes John. For one critical second, he loses concentration. That is all it takes. A rocket slams into the limo, sending it crashing into a nearby pool. Stentz and Walker arrive to retrieve Sawyer and John, but Cale manages to create a distraction. He buys just enough time to throw a grenade and escape with the president. One of the mercenaries then tries to finish them off with a minigun while they take cover inside a pool house. But his gunfire hits a boiler, triggering a massive explosion that is captured live on camera. The media assumes President Sawyer has been killed in the blast. With the country thrown into panic, Vice President Hammond is quickly sworn in as the new president. During all of this, Finnerty discovers that Walker has an inoperable brain tumor about the size of a golf ball, meaning he is already living under a death sentence. Hoping she can still stop him, Finnerty brings in his wife, Muriel Walker. Muriel tries to talk him down, but Walker insists that everything he is doing is for their dead son, Kevin. When Muriel remembers the injustice surrounding Kevin's death, she stops fighting him and allows her husband to continue seeking revenge. Back inside the White House, John gets Sawyer to a safer place so he can treat the wounds he suffered in the explosion. While they catch their breath, the two men talk about their lives and their daughters. John tells Sawyer that Emily is a huge admirer of his and that she truly believes in him. At the Pentagon, alarms suddenly begin blaring as Hammond orders a special forces unit to storm the White House and take it back. John urgently contacts Finnerty to warn them, but General Caulfield says Finnerty has been relieved of duty. As Black Hawk helicopters race through the streets toward the building, John warns them that the mercenaries have Javelin missiles and tells them to abort the mission. But his warning is ignored. The first Black Hawk is shot down almost immediately. The remaining two helicopters try to eliminate the mercenaries positioned on the roof, but a second Black Hawk is also destroyed. As the third helicopter comes under threat, John reaches the White House roof and manages to save it from being hit. There, he comes face-to-face with Stentz. Special Forces soldiers try to intervene, but Stentz fires on their helicopter and brings it down. The chopper crashes dangerously close to the hostages, missing them by only a small distance. John and Stentz then continue their vicious fight across the roof. Their battle becomes so intense that they eventually crash through a glass ceiling. John finally gains the upper hand, but just when it looks like he might finish Stentz, another mercenary appears and forces him to retreat. In the chaos, John loses his White House torpasses. That small mistake reveals the truth to the attackers. Emily is his daughter. Meanwhile, Tyler finishes the upload and finally breaks through the last firewall protecting the system. With that barrier gone, he gains access to NORAD's weapons network and uses it to launch a missile with terrifying accuracy. The missile locks onto Air Force One and strikes it in midair, sending the plane crashing down and killing everyone aboard, including the newly sworn-in President, Hammond. With Hammond dead, Speaker Raffleson is immediately sworn in as the next president and receives the nuclear codes. His first decision is ruthless. He orders an airstrike on the White House to wipe out the terrorists once and for all. The strike is scheduled to happen in just 10 minutes. Inside the White House, Walker writes down a set of codes while Stentz brings Emily into the Oval Office. Now that the mercenaries know she is John Cale's daughter, they use her as leverage. Over the intercom, they demand that Cale bring them President Sawyer, threatening to hurt Emily if he refuses. When Sawyer hears this, he decides he should surrender himself to protect her. Cale contacts Finnerty and learns there are only about 8 minutes left before the airstrike hits the White House. Time is running out fast. Walker then reveals the nuclear football to Sawyer. With it, they can launch nuclear attacks on several cities across the Middle East. Walker believes he is stopping other soldiers from dying the way his son did, but Sawyer refuses to activate it. Even when Emily's life is threatened, he will not agree to start a nuclear war. Emily understands the weight of that choice, even while standing in danger herself. Outside the Oval Office, Cale notices the famous painting of the White House burning and gets an idea. He starts a fire downstairs, hoping to trigger the sprinkler system and create enough chaos to interrupt Walker. Just before Walker can harm Emily, the alarms go off and the sprinklers activate, forcing him to stop. Cale uses the confusion to take down 2 armed men, but then Killick corners him. Just when it looks like Cale is trapped, Donnie, the tour guide, unexpectedly saves him by striking Killick with a fatal blow. Cale then tells Donnie to lead the hostages out of the building as quickly as possible. Elsewhere, Tyler tries to escape through one of the tunnels, but his own trap turns against him. He accidentally triggers one of the bombs he planted and kills himself. Back in the Oval Office, Walker and another mercenary argue because destroying half the world was never supposed to be part of the plan. Walker no longer cares and kills him without hesitation. Sawyer makes one desperate attempt to fight back by stabbing Walker with a pen, but it does not do enough damage. Walker overpowers him and forces him to open and activate the nuclear football. Across every launch site, nuclear missiles are armed and prepared to fire. At the same time, Stentz attacks Cale and throws him around with brutal force while the hostages escape the White House. In the Oval Office, Walker shoots Sawyer directly in the chest. Seeing this, Emily becomes furious and tries to attack Walker herself, but he easily shoves her aside. Cale and Stentz continue their vicious fight. After a hard struggle, Cale finally manages to wrap a grenade belt around Stentz's neck. He pulls the pins and leaves him trapped with no way out. Moments later, Stentz is blown apart. With only 2 minutes remaining before the airstrike, Walker begins entering the target codes for multiple locations. But before he can complete the launch, Cale crashes into the Oval Office in a van with only seconds left. He grabs a minigun and opens fire on Walker, stopping him just as the launch sequence times out. Cale tells Emily to run while he searches for Sawyer. Emily grabs the presidential flag and heads out onto the lawn. Fighter jets are already approaching the White House, ready to carry out the strike. Even though Raffleson does not cancel the order, the pilots refuse to continue once they see Emily waving the flag. Because of her, the airstrike is stopped at the last possible moment. Outside, the crowd erupts in cheers, and the media instantly begins calling Emily a hero. Back inside, Cale discovers that Sawyer is still alive. The bullet hit the pocket watch his wife gave him, the one he kept in his front pocket close to his heart. That watch saved his life. Finnerty contacts Cale and tells him the crisis still may not be fully over. She suspects the mercenaries were not truly hired by Walker or Stentz. Cale already has a strong idea of who was really behind the entire operation. Outside, Cale is finally reunited with Melanie and Emily. Finnerty and Raffleson then arrive at the White House and meet with him. Cale lies and tells them Sawyer is dead, watching closely to see how Raffleson reacts. Raffleson quickly suggests sending troops back into the Middle East to prevent possible retaliation, even though that would destroy the peace treaty Sawyer had been trying to secure. That is when Cale reveals he knows Raffleson was involved in the attack from the beginning. To prove it, he has Finnerty dial the callback number from the pager that was used to send Walker the updated codes. The truth becomes impossible to hide. Sawyer then steps out alive and orders Raffleson to be arrested, calling the entire attack exactly what it was, a coup d'etat. Finnerty admits she was wrong about Cale earlier and apologizes for not giving him the Secret Service position. Sawyer then boards his helicopter and officially refers to him as Special Agent Cale. He also invites Emily to come along for the ride. As they prepare to leave, Finnerty informs Sawyer that the leaders of Russia, China, Iran, and France have all agreed to the peace treaty. With the crisis finally over and the mission saved, Sawyer tells his pilot to do the thing. The helicopter rises above Washington as Cale and Emily sit back together, watching the view from the sky. White House Down starts with the kind of setup that feels almost proudly ridiculous, but in a very familiar action movie way. We meet John Cal, played by Channing Tatum, a Capitol police officer who is not exactly winning at life when the story begins. He is divorced, his relationship with his daughter Emily is shaky, and he is trying to land a job with the Secret Service. Not because he is some polished, perfect candidate either. Actually, his interview with Special Agent Carol Finnerty goes badly enough that you can almost feel the movie quietly saying, "Yeah, this guy is absolutely not getting hired." But Cal has another reason for being at the White House that day. He has brought Emily along for a tour, hoping it might help him score a few points as a father, and to be fair, it makes sense. Emily is obsessed with politics, the White House, the president, all of it. So for her, this is not just some boring government building tour. This is basically her version of a theme park. And then, because this is that kind of movie, the worst possible thing happens on the exact day Cal happens to be inside. The White House is attacked. President James Sawyer, played by Jamie Foxx, suddenly goes from leader of the free world to a guy who needs to be hidden, protected, moved, and basically dragged through an action movie. Cal, the man who was just rejected for the job of protecting the president, now becomes the only person in the right place at the right time to actually do it. That is the whole engine of White House Down. A rejected Secret Service hopeful, his daughter trapped somewhere in the chaos, the president under threat, the White House turning into a war zone. It is not subtle, it is not realistic. It is not even trying that hard to convince you this could happen in real life, but as a setup for a loud, over-the-top summer action movie, it gets the job done. The film basically asks you to accept one massive coincidence after another. Cal just happens to be there. His daughter just happens to be inside. The president just happens to need him. The attack just happens to unfold at the exact moment when this failed interview can turn into a heroic redemption story. And honestly, whether that works for you depends entirely on how much patience you have for big blockbuster logic, because this is not a movie built on realism. It is built on momentum. It wants to throw Cal into the White House, trap him there, give him personal stakes through Emily, give him national stakes through President Sawyer, and then let the whole thing explode outward from there. And in that sense, the premise is very simple. Maybe too simple, but it is also the kind of premise action movies have been surviving on for decades. One ordinary but capable guy stuck in an impossible situation, forced to become the hero nobody expected him to be. The only difference here is that the office building is now the White House, the hostage is the president, and the family drama is standing right in the middle of the gunfire. At the center of all the explosions and ridiculous White House chaos, the movie tries to give John Cal a more personal reason to care. Not just save the president, save the country, but save his daughter, and maybe prove to her that he is not the disappointment she thinks he is. That part matters, because when we first meet Cal and Emily, their relationship is not exactly warm and easy. There is distance there. Emily does not look at him like a hero. She looks at him like a dad who has let her down one too many times, and Cal knows it. You can see he is trying, but he is also kind of clumsy about it. He wants to reconnect with her, but he does not really know how to do that without turning it into some big gesture. So he brings her to the White House. And honestly, that part of the setup is one of the smarter little emotional hooks in the movie. Emily is not just randomly dragged into the story. She actually cares about this place. She knows politics, she admires the president, and she is excited to be there in a way that feels very specific to her character. For Cal, this tour is a chance to win back some respect. For Emily, it is a chance to be inside the world she is fascinated by. Of course, because this is White House Down, the father-daughter bonding trip turns into a hostage nightmare almost immediately. The movie uses Emily's danger to push Cal forward. Once the attack begins, he is not just fighting because he wants to be heroic. He is fighting because his daughter is somewhere inside this collapsing situation, surrounded by armed men, panic, and political madness. That gives the action a personal pulse, even when the larger plot gets completely absurd. Now, does the daughter subplot always work? Not really. There are moments where Emily feels less like a real kid and more like a screenwriter's shortcut. She is smart, political, brave, conveniently placed, and sometimes just a little too involved in the plot. The movie wants her to be the emotional heart, the patriotic voice, and the innocent person in danger all at once. That is a lot to put on one character, and there are scenes where it starts to feel forced, but the basic idea behind it is still clear. Cal is not only trying to save the president. He is trying to become the father Emily needs him to be. Every time he pushes through another impossible situation, every time he refuses to give up, the movie is really asking whether this disaster can somehow become his second chance. It is corny, absolutely. The whole dad proves himself through a national crisis thing is not exactly subtle storytelling, but in a big, loud action movie like this, that emotional simplicity kind of fits. You do not need a deeply complicated family drama when helicopters are crashing and the White House is being torn apart. You just need enough of a personal connection to make the hero's mission feel like more than a job. And that is what Emily gives the film. She turns Cal's survival mission into something messier, more emotional, and more desperate. The country may be watching the president, but Cal's real audience is his daughter. He does not just want to save the day. He wants her to finally believe he can. White House Down is one of those movies where you learn pretty quickly that logic is not driving the bus. Actually, logic might not even be in the vehicle. The film runs on pure blockbuster coincidence. John Cal fails his Secret Service interview, walks into a White House tour with his daughter, and then suddenly becomes the only guy capable of protecting the president during a full-scale attack. It is ridiculous, but the movie knows the audience came for chaos, not a security briefing, so it just keeps moving and hopes you do not stop to ask too many questions. The problem is, sometimes you do stop. Because there are moments where the movie stretches disbelief so far that it almost snaps. Armed attackers move through the White House like they bought a ticket and downloaded the floor plan. Trained security forces are taken out way too easily. The president somehow survives situations where every bullet in the room seems allergic to hitting him. Cal keeps running, fighting, escaping, crashing, shooting, and somehow still has enough energy to keep going like he is powered by action movie nonsense. And look, I am not saying a movie like this needs to be realistic. Nobody walks into White House Down expecting a documentary about presidential security. Big action movies are allowed to cheat. They are allowed to exaggerate. They are allowed to have impossible timing, last-second escapes, and heroes who survive things that would send a normal person straight to the hospital. But there is a difference between fun exaggeration and scenes that make you lean back and go, come on, that happens a lot here. The plot is constantly bending itself to create the next explosion, the next chase, the next hostage moment, the next heroic entrance. It does not really build tension through believable danger. It builds tension by stacking absurd situations on top of each other and hoping the noise is enough to distract you. Sometimes, honestly, it works. The movie is fast enough and loud enough that you can just ride with it. There is a silly charm in how shamelessly over the top it becomes. It is the kind of film where the White House can turn into a war zone and nobody seems emotionally equipped to respond like an actual human being. They respond like characters who know they are trapped inside a summer blockbuster, but the stupidity does pile up. After a while, the movie is not asking you to suspend disbelief anymore. It is asking you to throw disbelief out the window, lock the door behind it, and never speak of it again. And depending on your mood, that can either be entertaining or exhausting. For me, the absurdity is part of the film's identity. White House Down is not a smart thriller pretending to be dumb. It is a dumb thriller pretending it has just enough seriousness to matter. That is a very strange balance, and it does not always land. Still, there is something weirdly watchable about how committed it is. Every plot turn feels bigger, louder, and less believable than the last, but the movie never slows down long enough to apologize. It just blows something up and moves on. The easiest way to describe White House Down is also the most obvious one. It is Die Hard in the White House, and the movie is not exactly hiding that. You have the regular guy hero who is not supposed to be there. You have the important building taken over by armed criminals. You have the loved one trapped inside. You have the outside authorities trying to manage the situation from a distance. You have betrayals, secret motives, radio conversations, explosions, impossible escapes, and one man slowly becoming the biggest problem the villains did not plan for. That structure is so familiar that the movie almost feels like it came with the checklist already filled out. John Cal is basically dropped into the John McClane position, only instead of an office tower, it is the most famous political building in America. Instead of saving his wife, he is trying to save his daughter. Instead of Alan Rickman in a suit, we get a more chaotic mix of paramilitary attackers, corrupt insiders, and political grudges. And instead of a Christmas party, we get a White House tour that turns into a battlefield. The problem is not that White House Down borrows from Die Hard. A lot of action movies do. At this point, Die Hard is less of a single movie and more of a blueprint Hollywood keeps repainting. Die Hard on a bus, Die Hard on a plane, Die Hard on a boat, Die Hard in a hockey arena. So Die Hard in the White House was almost inevitable. The problem is that White House Down does not always make the formula feel new. It knows the beats, but it rarely surprises you with them. You can feel the movie setting up the emotional stakes. You can feel when a betrayal is coming. You can feel when a character is being positioned for a later reveal. Even the one man against impossible odds angle plays out almost exactly the way you expect it to. And because the movie keeps reminding you of better action films, especially Die Hard, it creates a comparison that does not really help it. because Die Hard worked not just because of the building or the hostage situation. It worked because the tension felt sharp, the villain felt controlled and dangerous, the hero felt vulnerable, tired, irritated, and human. Every floor of that building felt like a new problem. Every injury mattered. Every mistake had weight. White House Down has the shape of that kind of movie, but not always the pressure. Cal gets bruised, sure. He runs around in a vest, sure. He fights, shoots, hides, escapes, and improvises. But the film is so busy being big and loud that it rarely gives you that same feeling of a man barely surviving by instinct. It is more interested in spectacle than squeeze. More interested in the next set piece than the anxiety of being trapped. Still, I do think there is a reason the formula keeps working, even in a recycled form. There is something naturally satisfying about watching one underestimated guy become the wrench in a massive criminal operation. White House Down understands that simple pleasure. It gives Cal a building full of enemies, a daughter to protect, a president to drag through the madness, and a whole system that suddenly has to rely on the guy it rejected an hour earlier. That is old-school action movie stuff, and when the film leans into it without trying to be too clever, it can be fun. But original, not really. This is not a movie that reinvents the genre. It is a movie that raids the genre's closet, tries on the classic outfit, adds a few explosions, throws in some jokes, and hopes the audience is in the mood for comfort food. And honestly, that is probably the fairest way to watch it. Not as the next Die Hard, more like a loud, slightly ridiculous cover version performed by someone who knows the tune, but not always the soul behind it. The strange thing about White House Down is that it never really escaped the shadow of Olympus Has Fallen. And honestly, how could it? Both films came out in 2013. Both are about terrorists taking over the White House. Both have one action hero stuck inside, trying to save the president while the entire American government falls into panic mode outside. It is one of those Hollywood coincidences where you can almost imagine two studios looking at each other across the room like, wait, you're making that movie too. But even though the basic setup is almost the same, the two films do not feel the same. Olympus Has Fallen takes itself more seriously. It is darker, harder, more violent, and more aggressive. That movie wants you to feel the attack. It wants the White House takeover to feel brutal and nasty. Gerard Butler's hero is closer to the old-school action machine type, grim, efficient, angry, and built for survival. White House Down goes in a completely different direction. This one is lighter, sillier, more playful. It has more jokes, more buddy banter, more moments where the movie seems to wink at the audience instead of asking them to sit in total seriousness. Where Olympus wants intensity, White House Down wants popcorn. Where Olympus feels like a siege thriller, White House Down feels like an action comedy wearing a political thriller costume. And that difference is probably why people split so hard on them. If you want the White House attack premise to feel tense and dangerous, Olympus Has Fallen is probably the stronger version. It has more bite, the villains feel more threatening, the violence has more impact, and the whole thing is built around a clearer sense of danger. But if you want something more ridiculous, more colorful, more relaxed about its own stupidity, White House Down has its own appeal. It is the kind of movie where the president can end up in the middle of the action, throwing out lines, dodging bullets, and somehow turning a national crisis into a buddy adventure. The problem is, White House Down often suffers because the comparison exists at all. On its own, you might look at it as just another loud Roland Emmerich summer movie. But placed next to Olympus Has Fallen, its weaknesses become easier to see. The action feels less forceful, the stakes feel softer, the humor sometimes undercuts the suspense. And Channing Tatum, as likable as he can be, does not bring the same hard-edged action presence that Gerard Butler brings to his film. At the same time, I do not think it is completely fair to say White House Down is just the worse version of the same idea. It is trying to do something slightly different, not smarter necessarily, not better depending on your taste, but different. Olympus Has Fallen is the serious version. White House Down is the summer blockbuster version where everyone seems aware that the whole thing is absurd. That is why some viewers actually prefer it. It is easier to watch casually. It is less grim. It has more personality in the president-hero dynamic. It gives you explosions and political chaos without asking you to treat every second like a national tragedy. For me, the comparison comes down to mood. Olympus Has Fallen is the one you watch when you want a tougher, more direct action thriller. White House Down is the one you watch when you want something bigger, dumber, and more openly entertaining. They are twin movies, sure, but one walks in with a clenched jaw. The other walks in carrying a rocket launcher and a punchline. Roland Emmerich is not exactly the director you call when you want quiet, delicate realism. You call him when you want landmarks damaged, cities panicking, governments collapsing, and expensive things exploding in slow, dramatic fashion. That is his comfort zone. And White House Down sits very comfortably inside that zone, even if it is not his biggest or most outrageous disaster movie. This time, instead of destroying the whole planet or leveling half a city, Emmerich narrows the chaos down to one very famous building. The White House becomes his playground. Hallways turn into battlegrounds. Rooms become hiding spots. The lawn becomes a car chase track. Helicopters, rockets, fire, smoke, shattered glass. The movie keeps finding ways to make the place feel less like a seat of government and more like a theme park attraction having a very bad day. And that is both the fun and the problem, because Emmerich knows how to stage scale. He knows how to make a blockbuster feel big. Even when the story is ridiculous, the film rarely feels small. There is always movement, always panic, always some new piece of destruction being introduced before the last one has fully settled. He understands that this kind of movie needs forward motion, and for the most part, he keeps pushing it along. But he also hits almost every cliché you expect him to hit: the noble hero, the impossible rescue, the corrupt people in power, the ticking clock, the patriotic speeches, the last-second save, the huge national threat hanging over everything. It is all here, and Emmerich does not exactly handle it with a light touch. He goes big, then bigger, then somehow a little bigger again, even when the scene probably needed less noise and more tension. That is where White House Down starts to feel very much like an Emmerich film. It is not built around restraint. It is built around spectacle. If there is a choice between a grounded moment and a ridiculous set piece, the movie will almost always choose the ridiculous set piece. If there is a chance to turn political panic into visual chaos, it takes that chance immediately. And honestly, some of that works. There is a reason people still watch these kinds of movies. Emmerich has a very specific talent for turning disaster into popcorn entertainment. He is not asking you to believe every detail. He is asking you to sit back and enjoy the machine. The explosions, the impossible timing, the heroes running through debris, the government officials yelling in control rooms, the world somehow depending on one guy who is not even supposed to be there. The issue is that this approach can only carry the film so far. When the action is moving, White House Down has energy. When the destruction is front and center, it feels like the movie knows what it wants to be. But when it needs suspense, emotional weight, or smarter plotting, Emmerich's style does not always help. The spectacle starts covering for weak writing instead of enhancing strong material. Still, I would not say the direction is lazy. It is very deliberate. This is Emmerich doing what Emmerich does, taking a simple premise, inflating it with national stakes, and treating every hallway like it could become the center of a disaster sequence. Whether you enjoy that depends on your tolerance for his style. If you want subtlety, this movie is going to drive you insane. But if you want polished, loud, proudly overblown destruction with just enough character banter to keep things moving, then White House Down gives you exactly the version of Roland Emmerich you probably came for. Not his smartest work, not his most memorable either, but definitely his kind of chaos. If there is one thing White House Down absolutely refuses to be shy about, it is action. This movie does not tiptoe into chaos. Once the attack begins, it pretty much throws the White House into full blockbuster meltdown mode and keeps finding new ways to make things louder. Gunfire in the halls, explosions tearing through rooms, helicopters dropping in and out of the sky, rocket launchers, fires, secret tunnels, hand-to-hand fights, and yes, because subtlety left the building early, even a car chase on the White House lawn. That lawn chase is probably the kind of scene that tells you exactly what movie you are watching. It is absurd, completely absurd, but it is also the sort of absurdity the film is clearly proud of. You are not supposed to sit there calculating whether this could happen. You are supposed to watch Channing Tatum and Jamie Foxx get thrown into the most ridiculous presidential escape scenario possible and either laugh with it or give up entirely. And honestly, some of the action does work. The movie has pace once it gets going. It understands that a premise this silly cannot sit still for too long. Every few minutes, Cal is either running from someone, fighting someone, trying to find Emily, protecting Sawyer, dodging bullets, or stumbling into another part of the building where something expensive is about to be destroyed. That constant movement helps the film. Even when the story is weak, the action keeps it from feeling completely dead. It has that big-budget summer energy where the movie is basically saying, look, maybe this does not make sense, but something is about to explode, so stay with me. The problem is repetition. After a while, the shootouts start blending together. The villains fire 1,000 rounds and hit almost nothing important. Cal survives so many close calls that danger starts to feel decorative. The White House keeps taking damage, but because the movie is so over the top from the beginning, the destruction loses impact instead of building tension. That is the tricky thing about action. More is not always more. A good action scene needs shape. It needs escalation. It needs a sense that the characters are solving a problem, not just moving through noise. White House Down sometimes has that, especially when it pairs action with the Cal and Sawyer dynamic. But other times, it just keeps throwing firepower at the screen and hoping volume can replace suspense. Still, I would be lying if I said the action has no entertainment value. There is fun here. Dumb fun, yes, but fun. The movie gives you the kind of set pieces that feel designed for a packed summer audience. Loud reactions, quick laughs, big crashes, ridiculous escapes. It is not elegant action. It is not gritty action. It is not the kind of action that makes you feel every punch and every bullet. It is popcorn action, and that can be enough depending on what you came for. If you want realism, the film falls apart almost immediately. But if you want a 2-hour parade of gunfire, destruction, and impossible hero moments inside the most overprotected building in America, White House Down knows how to serve that meal. It may not always be thrilling. It may not always be smart, but it rarely forgets to blow something up. The humor in White House Down is either part of the fun or part of the problem, depending on how seriously you wanted this movie to take itself. Because on paper, this is a pretty serious situation. The White House has been invaded. People are being killed. The president is being hunted. A child is trapped somewhere inside the chaos. There are military threats, political betrayal, nuclear stakes, and a whole country watching the government fall apart in real time. And then the movie keeps cracking jokes. That is the strange balance White House Down is trying to play. It wants the danger of a political siege thriller, but it also wants the loose energy of a buddy action comedy. Sometimes that combination gives the film its personality. Other times, it completely drains the tension out of the scene. The banter between John Cal and President Sawyer is clearly meant to be one of the big selling points. Channing Tatum plays Cal with that casual, slightly goofy action hero charm, while Jamie Foxx gives Sawyer a more relaxed, modern, sometimes almost too casual kind of presidential energy. Put them together, and the movie becomes less about one man saving the president and more about two guys surviving the world's most dangerous workplace disaster. And when the jokes land, the movie does become easier to enjoy. There is something funny about the president being dragged through gunfire, like he accidentally wandered into the wrong genre. There is something amusing about a national crisis turning into a buddy escape movie. The film knows this is ridiculous, and every now and then, that self-awareness helps. It stops the movie from becoming too stiff or too fake serious. But the problem is that White House Down does not always know when to stop. Some of the one-liners feel forced. Some of the comic moments arrive right when the movie should probably be building suspense. And instead of making the danger feel sharper, the humor sometimes makes everything feel lighter than it should. You are watching a life-or-death situation, but the film keeps nudging you in the ribs like, pretty crazy, right? That can get tiring. The tour guide comedy is another example. It is clearly there to add a side dose of absurdity, but not every joke feels like it belongs. At times, the humor makes the movie feel less like a thriller with funny moments, and more like an action comedy that forgot to fully admit what it was. And honestly, that may be the real identity of the film. White House Down was dressed up like a high-stakes political action thriller, but deep down, it behaves like a loud, expensive action comedy. The violence is softened. The heroes keep joking. The president becomes part sidekick, part action partner. Even some of the villains get moments that feel broader and more cartoonish than genuinely threatening. For some viewers, that is exactly why the movie works. It does not sit there trying to be grim and brutal. It lets itself be silly. It plays with the genre. It turns the White House attack premise into something more playful, more ridiculous, and more openly popcorn-friendly. For others, that same choice is what weakens the whole thing. Because if the humor is not funny enough and the danger is not tense enough, then the movie lands in a strange middle space. Not sharp enough as comedy. Not gripping enough as suspense. Just noisy, busy, and constantly trying to charm its way past weak writing. Still, I get what the film is going for. It wants you to enjoy the ride, not question the tone. It wants the banter to make the explosions feel more entertaining. It wants Cal and Sawyer to feel like an unlikely action duo rather than just a bodyguard and a president. And when that chemistry clicks, White House Down has a fun, loose rhythm. When it does not, the jokes feel like they are standing in front of the suspense, waving for attention. Channing Tatum is an interesting choice for John Cal because the movie needs him to be a few different things at once. He has to be believable as a guy with combat experience. He has to look like someone who can take a beating, throw a punch, fire a weapon, and keep moving through a building full of armed attackers. But he also has to play the slightly messy father, the underdog job applicant, the rejected almost Secret Service guy, and the action hero who slowly earns everyone's trust. That is a lot for one character, especially in a movie that is not exactly giving him deep dramatic material. Physically, Tatum fits the role pretty well. He has the build, the movement, the action presence. When Cal is running through corridors, crashing through rooms, fighting off attackers, or getting dragged into another ridiculous set piece, Tatum looks comfortable enough. You buy that he can survive in this kind of movie universe, even if the situations themselves are completely insane. He also has that relaxed, likable quality that helps the film. Cal is not written as some cold, perfect action machine. He is a little rough around the edges. He makes mistakes. He is trying to prove something. He is not the guy the system wanted, but he becomes the guy the situation needs. Tatum can sell that kind of everyday charm better than he can sell heavy emotional drama, and that is where the performance becomes more mixed. When the movie asks him to be loose, funny, physical, and reactive, he does fine. He can throw out a dumb line. He can play off Jamie Foxx. He can make Cal feel like a guy who is overwhelmed but still stubborn enough to keep going. In the lighter action comedy moments, he fits the tone, but when the film asks for deeper intensity, it gets shakier. There are scenes where Cal is supposed to be terrified for Emily, furious at the villains, desperate, emotionally cracked open, and Tatum does not always reach the level the moment needs. Sometimes he looks a little too blank, a little too controlled, like the movie is telling us he is devastated more than the performance is making us feel it. That is probably why the Bruce Willis comparison follows him around here. Because White House Down is so openly built from the die-hard mold, Cal naturally gets measured against John McClane, and that is not an easy comparison for anyone. Bruce Willis made McClane feel tired, annoyed, wounded, scared, funny, and heroic all at once. He did not just win fights, he suffered through them. Tatum's Cal has the outline of that kind of hero, but not always the same texture. He is more polished, more physically superheroic, less emotionally scrappy. You can see the movie trying to present him as the modern version of that old-school action lead, but it does not fully land because Cal rarely feels as vulnerable as he should. He gets battered, sure, but the movie keeps treating him like the action figure version of a flawed man. Still, I do not think Tatum is bad in the role. He is not the strongest dramatic actor in the cast, and he does not carry the film with pure screen presence the way a classic action star might have. But he is watchable. He has enough charm to keep Cal from becoming boring, and enough physical credibility to make the action scenes move. The issue is that White House Down sometimes needs a sharper light than it gives him room to be. Cal is surrounded by spectacle, jokes, explosions, government panic, villain speeches, and presidential banter. Instead of becoming the undeniable center of the movie, he often feels like one part of a much bigger machine. That works for the ensemble energy, but it weakens him as the lone man against the world hero the story is clearly trying to build. So Tatum gets the job done, not perfectly, not memorably enough to redefine this kind of role, but well enough for the version of the movie he is in. He is not Bruce Willis. He is not Gerard Butler either. He is Channing Tatum in a vest, running through the White House, trying very hard to turn a failed interview into the most chaotic job audition imaginable. And honestly, for this movie, that is about right. Jamie Foxx's President Sawyer is one of the strangest pieces of White House Down because he feels like he walked in from a slightly different movie, not always in a bad way. Just noticeably, the film clearly wants Sawyer to be a modern, likable, cool president. He is not written as some stiff, distant commander-in-chief who only speaks in speeches and crisis room language. He jokes. He argues. He gets dragged into the action. He panics a little. He improvises. At times, he feels less like the most protected man in the country and more like the unexpected second half of a buddy action duo. And depending on how you read the movie, that either gives it energy or completely breaks the illusion. Foxx is naturally charismatic, so there are moments where he makes the role more fun than it probably is on the page. When Sawyer is trading lines with John Cal, trying to survive ridiculous situations, or slowly becoming more involved in the fight, Foxx brings a looseness that keeps the movie from turning too heavy. He is not trying to play the president as untouchable. He plays him as a person who has been thrown into a nightmare and is trying to keep up. That part can be entertaining. The idea of a president who suddenly has to run, hide, shoot, and think on his feet inside his own collapsing house is a fun action movie hook, and Foxx understands the comedy in that. He gives Sawyer a kind of casual confidence, like even in the middle of national disaster, the guy still has room for a remark or two, but then comes the other side of it. There are scenes where Sawyer just does not feel presidential enough. Not because every movie president has to be serious and grave every second, but because White House Down sometimes writes him so casually that the authority disappears. The dialogue does not always sound like it belongs to a world leader. His reactions can feel too light, his reasoning can feel too simple, and when the film tries to make him both the symbolic leader of the country and the comic partner in an action set piece, the two versions do not always fit together. That is where the performance becomes divisive. Some viewers see Foxx as one of the best parts of the movie because he keeps things lively. Others see him as completely unconvincing, maybe even the weakest version of a fictional president in this type of blockbuster. And honestly, both reactions make sense because the character is pulled in two directions. The movie wants Sawyer to represent big political ideas, peace talks, military decisions, national stability, the future of American power. But it also wants him dodging bullets, delivering jokes, and bonding with Cal like they are stuck in the world's most expensive buddy comedy. That is a difficult balance, and the script does not always help Foxx find it. When the film leans into the comedy, he works better. When it asks him to carry the weight of the presidency, the role feels thinner. You can enjoy him in individual moments and still feel that the character, as written, lacks the dignity or sharpness the story keeps pretending he has. Still, there is something memorable about how unusual this president is. He is not the stern background figure waiting to be rescued. He is not just a hostage. He gets involved. He becomes part of the escape. He has to learn very quickly that being president does not mean much when armed men have turned the White House into a shooting gallery. And that makes Sawyer more active than the usual protected political figure in these films. Does it always work? No, but the movie would be a lot duller without him. Foxx brings warmth, humor, and a bit of unpredictability to a role that could have easily been nothing more than important man in danger. The problem is that White House Down sometimes confuses likable with believable. As a buddy action partner, Sawyer is fun. As the President of the United States during the most insane crisis imaginable, he is much harder to buy. The thing that keeps White House Down from becoming completely mechanical is the pairing of Channing Tatum and Jamie Foxx. That is really the movie's main trick, because without that dynamic, this could have easily been just another loud White House siege movie. Bad guys storm the building, hero runs through hallways, president gets moved from one danger zone to another, government officials yell at screens, repeat until the finale. We have seen that version before, a lot, but once John Cal and President Sawyer are forced together, the movie starts to loosen up. Cal is not officially supposed to be protecting this man. That is the funny part. He was just rejected for the job. He came into the building trying to prove he belonged near the president, got told no, and then, by the most ridiculous timing imaginable, ends up doing the exact job anyway. Sawyer, meanwhile, is not some distant political symbol anymore. He is suddenly right there beside him, confused, annoyed, frightened, and slowly realizing that this rejected guy might be his best chance of getting out alive. That gives their relationship a nice little action movie spark. Tatum plays Cal like a guy who is constantly trying to stay calm while everything around him is going insane. Foxx plays Sawyer with this casual, sometimes overly relaxed energy, like even in the middle of a national disaster he cannot fully stop being himself. Together, they create a rhythm that is less bodyguard and president, and more two mismatched guys stuck in the worst buddy road trip ever, except the road trip is through a burning White House. And when the movie lets them bounce off each other, it is honestly more entertaining. There is something naturally funny about Cal trying to keep the president alive while also getting irritated by him. Sawyer is important, obviously, but he is also another person Cal has to manage. He slows things down, he asks questions, he makes comments, he wants to help, but helping sometimes makes things worse. That push and pull gives the film some personality. At the same time, the dynamic is not as strong as it could have been. You can feel the movie reaching for that classic buddy action chemistry, where the danger is real, but the back and forth keeps things alive. Sometimes it gets there. Sometimes the jokes feel too placed, like the script is pausing to remind you, these two are funny together, right? And that is where the pairing becomes uneven, because great banter has to feel accidental. It should sound like two people reacting under pressure, not like two characters waiting for their next punchline. White House Down has moments where Cal and Sawyer feel natural together, especially when the action is moving quickly. But in other scenes, the comedy is a little too obvious, a little too polished, and it weakens the suspense instead of sharpening it. Still, I understand why the movie leans so hard on them. Tatum and Foxx make the film lighter. They give it a different flavor from the more serious version of this same premise. Instead of one grim hero silently taking down enemies, White House Down becomes a two-man escape story. It is not just Cal saving Sawyer. It is Cal and Sawyer learning, very awkwardly, how to survive together. And that is probably when the film is at its most watchable, not when it is pretending the politics are deep, not when it is trying to make every twist feel shocking. not even when it is blowing apart another section of the building. It works best when these two are stuck in a ridiculous situation, trying to figure out the next impossible move and somehow turning panic into banter. The movie honestly could have used even more of that, because for all the explosions and betrayals and national crisis material, the simplest pleasure here is watching a rejected Secret Service hopeful and a very unprepared president become an accidental action duo. It is messy, it is uneven, but it gives White House Down its pulse. The villains in White House Down are not just a random group of masked men kicking down doors for the sake of noise. Well, sometimes they feel like that. But the movie does try to give the attack a bigger political shape. This is not framed as a simple foreign invasion or some faceless terrorist plot from overseas. The threat comes from inside the system, or at least close enough to it that the whole situation feels more personal and more rotten. That is one of the more interesting choices the film makes. Instead of going with the easiest possible enemy, White House Down builds its conspiracy around domestic anger, personal grudges, political extremism, and people who feel betrayed by the direction the country is taking. President Sawyer wants peace. He wants to pull troops back. He wants to move away from the endless machinery of war. And naturally, in this kind of blockbuster, that means powerful people with money, weapons, and old grudges are not going to sit quietly and let that happen. So the attack becomes more than just bad guys take over the White House. It becomes this messy collision of paramilitary violence, corrupt insiders, Secret Service betrayal, and the military-industrial complex angle that the movie keeps waving around. Some villains have ideological reasons, some seem driven by revenge, some are there for profit, some are just there because the film needs heavily armed men storming hallways every few minutes. And honestly, that mix is both interesting and clumsy. On one hand, domestic villains make the premise feel a little different from Olympus Has Fallen. There is something sharper about the danger coming from within, from people who know the system, understand the building, and are able to exploit trust. It gives the attack a betrayal angle that foreign invasion stories do not always have. On the other hand, the movie does not always know what to do with those ideas beyond turning them into action fuel. It hints at serious themes: extremism, government loyalty, profit from war, corruption at high levels, the fear of peace threatening powerful interests, but it never really sits with them. Any chance of deeper commentary is quickly pushed aside for another gunfight, another countdown, another chase, another explosion. And then there is James Woods. His character brings that classic scenery-chewing villain energy. He is not subtle, and the movie does not need him to be. He is the kind of antagonist who walks into the story already carrying resentment, menace, and a whole lot of personal bitterness. You can tell the film wants him to feel like the inside man who makes the whole nightmare possible, and Woods gives that role a certain old-school nastiness. Jason Clarke, as Stentz, brings a more physical threat. He is the kind of villain who makes the danger feel immediate. Less political speech, more boots-on-the-ground violence. When he is around, the attack feels less like a conspiracy theory and more like a real assault happening room by room. That contrast helps. Woods gives the betrayal its face. Clarke gives the violence its muscle. The problem is that the villains as a group are not always as threatening as they should be. Their plans are huge, their weapons are serious, their goals are catastrophic, but sometimes they behave like action movie cartoons. The motivations can feel half-baked. The twists are easy to see coming. And the more the movie explains the conspiracy, the less sharp it sometimes feels. Still, I do like that White House Down at least tries to make the villains more layered than a simple invading force. You have extremists, you have insiders. You have old political wounds. You have people using patriotism as an excuse for destruction. You have this idea that the real danger is not just outside the gates, but already standing inside the building with a badge, a title, or a grudge. That is a strong idea. The movie does not explore it deeply enough, but it does give the action a slightly different flavor. Because in White House Down, the White House is not only being attacked, it is being betrayed from within. One of the funny things about White House Down is that the supporting cast is almost too good for the movie around them. You look down the list and there are a lot of recognizable faces: Maggie Gyllenhaal, James Woods, Jason Clarke, Richard Jenkins, Joey King, Jimmy Simpson, Lance Reddick, Michael Murphy. These are not random background players. These are actors who, in the right material, can bring real weight, texture, humor, or menace to a scene. And in White House Down, some of them do get moments. James Woods probably benefits the most. He understands exactly what kind of film he is in. He is not trying to play everything with tiny, restrained realism. He brings that bitter, theatrical villain energy, the kind that works in a big, loud movie where subtlety is not exactly the house style. Every time he shows up, the film feels a little more alive, mostly because he gives the conspiracy side of the story a clear face. Jason Clarke also stands out because he brings a more direct physical danger. He is not there to be charming. He is there to make the takeover feel aggressive and immediate. His character gives the attack some muscle, and that helps because the movie badly needs villains who can feel dangerous beyond just having bigger guns. Then you have Jimmy Simpson as Skip Tyler, the hacker, who adds a different kind of flavor. In a movie full of soldiers, agents, politicians, and action cliches, he brings a more offbeat presence. He is not the main attraction, but he gives the film another little pocket of personality, which matters in a story that can easily become just hallways, gunfire, and people shouting into radios. Maggie Gyllenhaal is a little trickier. She is obviously capable of more than the movie gives her. As Carol Finnerty, she has an important role in the structure of the story. She is the one who rejects Cal. She is tied to the Secret Service world, and she becomes part of the outside response once everything goes wrong. But the character mostly exists to keep the official side of the crisis moving. She gets seriousness. She gets urgency. She gets responsibility. What she does not really get is a lot of room. And that is the pattern with several of the supporting actors. Richard Jenkins, Lance Reddick, Michael Murphy, and others help fill out the government response side of the movie. They make the crisis feel bigger than just Cal and Sawyer running around inside the White House. You need those control room arguments, those command decisions, those worried officials trying to figure out who is in charge. But most of these characters are functional more than memorable. They are pieces of the machinery. Some are there to deliver exposition. Some are there to argue about protocol. Some are there so the film can show political panic outside the building. They do their jobs, but the script does not always give them enough personality to become more than familiar faces in important-looking rooms. Joey King as Emily is probably the most divisive supporting presence. The film clearly wants her to be more than just the daughter in danger. She is politically aware, observant, brave, and sometimes smarter than the adults around her. That gives her a stronger role in the plot, but it also makes her feel overdesigned at times. She has to be the emotional center, the patriotic kid, the hostage, the witness, and the reason Cal keeps pushing forward. That is a lot for one character to carry. Still, she gives the movie personal stakes. Without Emily, Cal's mission would be mostly professional. With her inside the chaos, the whole thing becomes more desperate. So the supporting cast is a mixed bag, not because the actors are weak, but because the film does not always know how to use them. Some get to chew the scenery, some get one or two strong moments. Some are clearly there because a blockbuster this big needs recognizable people standing around the president, the military, and the Secret Service. But very few of them are developed enough to leave a lasting mark beyond the function they serve. And that is kind of the movie in miniature. There is talent everywhere, there is energy everywhere, but the script keeps pushing everyone back toward the same big machine. Get to the next crisis, the next reveal, the next explosion, the next piece of chaos. The cast gives White House Down more credibility than it probably earns on the page. The frustrating part is that you can feel how much sharper the movie might have been if it had let more of these people actually play. For a movie this expensive and this obsessed with spectacle, White House Down has a surprisingly uneven visual texture. There are moments where it looks like the big summer blockbuster it clearly wants to be. The action has scale. The building takes damage, helicopters swing into frame, rooms explode, smoke fills the halls. The movie keeps reminding you that a lot of money was spent putting chaos on screen. But then, every now and then, you get a shot that looks strangely cheap. The helicopter effects are probably the easiest example. Some of them have that overly smooth, video game quality where the weight just is not there. You can tell the movie wants those images to feel massive and dangerous, but instead you become aware of the effects. And once that happens, the illusion starts to crack a little. The same thing happens with some of the green screen work. There are scenes where the actors do not fully feel like they belong inside the environment around them. It is not always terrible, but it is noticeable enough that it pulls you out of the moment. And in an action film that already asks for a ridiculous amount of suspension of disbelief, the visuals really need to help sell the fantasy, not remind you how artificial it is. The sets are another mixed area. On one hand, the idea of recreating the White House as this giant action playground is fun. You get hallways, offices, bunkers, tour areas, ceremonial rooms, hidden spaces, and the lawn itself turned into different stages of the same siege. There is pleasure in watching a familiar political symbol become a maze for an action movie. But on the other hand, some of it really does feel like a set, not just in the normal movie production sense, but in that very clean, staged, soundstage kind of way. Certain rooms feel less like lived-in government spaces and more like expensive replicas waiting to be destroyed. That does not always ruin the film, because honestly, the whole movie has a slightly artificial, theme park quality anyway. But it does add to the sense that White House Down is more interested in spectacle than immersion. Then there is the lighting. Most of the time, the movie is readable enough, which is important because action scenes can become a mess very quickly if you cannot follow who is where. But there are also darker stretches where the chaos becomes a little too murky. The intention is obvious: make the building feel under attack, unstable, dangerous, full of smoke and panic. But sometimes the darkness does not add tension. It just makes the scene harder to track. And that is the strange thing about the film's technical side. It is not a small-looking movie. It is not some cheap production pretending to be massive. You can see the resources. You can see the ambition. You can see the attempt to make every few minutes feel like a new piece of blockbuster destruction. But the polish is inconsistent. Some shots have that glossy studio action confidence. Others feel rushed or overly digital. Some of the practical-looking destruction works well enough, while some of the computer-generated spectacle lands with a thud. It is especially noticeable because the movie is constantly asking its visuals to carry the excitement. When the story is thin and the logic is shaky, the images need to do a lot of heavy lifting. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they absolutely do not. Still, I do think the artificial quality almost becomes part of the movie's personality. White House Down is already a loud, ridiculous, half-comic action fantasy. So when the White House looks a little like a giant movie set, it oddly fits the tone. It makes the whole thing feel less like a grounded siege thriller and more like a blockbuster ride where historical realism was never really the priority. That does not excuse the weaker effects, especially with this kind of budget, but it does explain why they are not always fatal to the experience. The film is big, bright, noisy, messy, and obviously manufactured. At its best, that gives it the feel of an old-school popcorn spectacle. At its worst, it looks like a very expensive movie that still somehow could not make every explosion, helicopter, and digital backdrop feel convincing. And with White House Down, that is pretty much the technical story. Lots of money on screen, not always enough weight behind it. White House Down is one of those movies where the final opinion really depends on what mood you bring into it. Because if you walk in wanting a smart political thriller, this thing is going to test your patience almost immediately. The logic is nonsense. The villains are exaggerated. The dialogue swings between cheesy and awkward. The action gets repetitive, and the movie keeps treating absurd situations like they can be fixed by another explosion, another joke, or another last-second escape. But if you walk in wanting a loud, ridiculous, easy-to-watch summer blockbuster, then the film is harder to dismiss. There is entertainment here, not elegant entertainment. Not the kind of action filmmaking that feels sharp or dangerous or built with serious tension. More like the kind of entertainment where you know the movie is stupid, the movie probably knows it is stupid, and for 2 hours everybody just agrees to keep going anyway. That is the strange charm of it. White House Down is not good in the clean, respectable sense. It is too messy for that, too bloated, too predictable, too dependent on familiar action movie tricks. It borrows heavily from better films, especially Die Hard, and it never fully earns that comparison. It also sits next to Olympus Has Fallen in a way that makes it softer, sillier tones stand out even more. But at the same time, it is not completely lifeless. Channing Tatum and Jamie Foxx give the movie enough personality to stay watchable. The action is frequent. The pace, once it gets moving, keeps the film from sinking entirely. James Woods and Jason Clarke bring some villain energy, and Roland Emmerich, for all his excess, understands how to make a blockbuster feel like a blockbuster. He gives you destruction, scale, panic, and that very specific feeling of a movie designed to be watched with snacks, not analyzed with a notebook. Still, the flaws do not disappear just because the movie is fun in places. The biggest issue is that White House Down never becomes thrilling enough to be a great action movie, and it is not funny enough to be a great action comedy. It lands somewhere in the middle, where you can enjoy the ride while also noticing how many parts of it do not really work. The suspense keeps getting undercut. The emotional beats are corny. The daughter subplot is useful but uneven. The twists are not especially shocking, and by the time the film reaches the final stretch, you can feel the length. It is the kind of movie that gives you exactly what it promises, but not much more. A White House takeover. A rejected hero proving himself. A president pulled into the action. Explosions in famous rooms. Government officials panicking. A child in danger. Villains with grudges. A big final save. If that list sounds entertaining, then yes, you will probably have a decent time with it. But if that list sounds like every action cliché thrown into one very expensive blender, you are also not wrong. For me, White House Down works best when you stop expecting it to be clever. The moment you try to take it seriously, it starts falling apart. But when you accept it as dumb, glossy, overblown popcorn chaos, it becomes a lot easier to sit through. Maybe even enjoy, not love, enjoy, and that distinction matters. This is not a movie I would call essential. It is not something that demands a rewatch. It is not the stronger version of its own premise, and it definitely is not the new Die Hard. But as a noisy, silly, occasionally charming action ride, it has enough energy to survive its own stupidity. So the final verdict is simple. White House Down is not a great movie. It might not even be a good one in the traditional sense, but as disposable blockbuster comfort food, the kind you put on when you want explosions, jokes, and absolutely no homework from the plot, it does the job well enough.